Okay, so I'm going to give you an update on a project that's been going on at the Open University for a couple of years now. Basically asking what would it mean if we were to try and create a social media learning space tuned for learning, inquiry, and sense-making. So we're interested in learners, both informal and formal, in the workplace or just at home, in their lives, as Eric was talking about. And what I'll do is step through some of the rationale and thinking that's gone into this. We've been through one round of internal testing at the OU with over 1,000 users on this, learned quite a lot of lessons about that, and are now in a second phase of testing at the OU. It's a kind of internal innovation pilot. And I'll take you on some of the journey of the rationale behind this. There's more in the paper than I can cover in the next 20 minutes, but let's go. So this is the big question. So lots of you are experimenting with Ning, Facebook, wikis, all the existing stuff out there in the cloud. Of course, none of these were actually designed for learning. They were designed just for informal social interaction. And that's absolutely critical. They have very low entry overheads. They're very easy to use. They've done great deal for the quality of user interface design. But we're trying to push a little further and say, what does it mean to effect a transfer into something that's specifically designed for learning from the ground up? Not that we want to try and replace all of these things. We have to coexist with them, of course. So we're a university. We're not a Silicon Valley.com startup. There's no way we can compete head-to-head with all the innovation that's going on in the world right now. So we have to ask ourselves the question, what can we specifically do as a university and still harness all the innovation that hasn't even happened yet, that we can't even see coming around the corner, so that we're not just building ourselves a nice little prison that eventually just gets ignored. And I'll talk a little bit about why social learning now. Okay, there are various arguments, which I can't unpack in detail in all of these, but there are arguments from technology, around the huge amounts of uncertainty and complexity we now face, around pedagogy, around the business imperative for innovation, and around resilience in systems, which I talked about yesterday. Okay, so 4 dimensions of open. We're pretty familiar from OER with open IP and the idea that the stuff is there to be taken and remixed. And of course, OER, to varying degrees, is engaging with some of these other concepts of open. We're all worrying about the open economics dimension and the financial aspect of sustainability. Depending on the OER initiative we're talking about, you may or may not be playing in different games in terms of linked data and XML, etc. And of course, we're particularly interested in this open communities idea, which is that people have got a lot of interesting things to say. And in particular, when you look at content, we need to move from a focus on content to learning, engagement, inquiry, learning conversations, critical thinking. It's the sense-making, and that's one of the drivers behind social learn, which is how do we harness the kind of energy we see in these user-generated contexts around OER to actually create effective learning. In the business world, we have people writing books like The New Social Learning and Informal Learning. So everybody in HR and training are now recognizing the limits of simply structured delivery of content, where you go on your training course for 3 days, come back, and then get on with your day job, and it never really made a difference. It's exactly the same kind of fake learning that Eric was just talking about in educational institutions. So there's a huge imperative coming now from business and industry around social learning. The book that's made the biggest impact on me in the last year has been The Power of Pull, by Hegel and John Seeley Brown and one other whose name escapes me right now. This is an argument map that summarizes a little bit of their argument, and I think it's worth unpacking. Okay, so they characterize this notion of pull, which they say encapsulates a set of game-changing patterns in the way that we think about learning and inquiry and knowledge transfer. They argue, not surprisingly, that it's increasingly hard to predict the future, which means that knowledge in these emerging, poorly understood fields is tacit and is hard to communicate symbolically. It's not well codified. There aren't very many best practices when you're facing novel situations. And they talk a lot about personal passion. whether it's in the workplace or whether it's surfers or whether it's learning in school. Personal passion and commitment to a topic, if you can manage to engage it, is absolutely critical. If we unpack these sort of premises a little bit, they give lots of examples of how corporate failure, because life changed too fast, and how digital infrastructure is changing things so fast. If we unpack the argument here, they talk about the fact that, well, obviously, tacit knowledge is shared person to person. And if we want to talk about the quality of relationships, then we're talking about trust. We're moving away from a sort of business transactions model to quality social professional relationships is what gets the job done now. And that has certain implications about the kinds of people that we are creating. And this is an argument about what goes on in school as much as what goes on in our higher ed institutions. A lot of John Seeley Brown's earlier work around apprenticeship and so forth ties into that, and the idea of authentic experience. So all this focus on tacit knowledge, the fact that social interaction and discourse is incredibly important. And that sort of begs the question then, well, what are the skills and dispositions and the habits of mind we need to foster to create people who are passionate and self-motivated? And often our schools are failing in this, and arguably our other institutions. Now, on the web at the moment, we have my this, my that, my the next thing. The world is person-centered, and that, of course, is a good thing to a degree, right? The whole mass customization paradigm says, I expect the world to organize itself around me. I don't want to have to start my course next year. I want to start now, and I want it to do this kind of things for me to achieve my personal learning journey. So, you know, the me-centered world, where I have the universe organized around me, is good in some ways. But when we're talking about learning, a me-centered universe, of course, is not going to be the whole story. Because what I think I need may not be what I actually need. My ability to assess my own learning may be quite flawed. And there are many other arguments why, you know, simply surrounding myself with people and feeds and news who agree with me and keeping me in my own little comfort zone is not going to actually stretch me. That's one of the reasons why, from a pedagogical perspective, social learning is so important, because you've got other people who may not actually agree with you. And you know, a lot of the literature says, well, for good social learning, you need trust and affirmation. You need people to tell you that it's okay to be stuck. You need people to be supportive and friendly, and we see a lot of that on social networks. But you also need people who are going to challenge you. And they can challenge you because they have a quality of relationship with you that means that they can stretch and challenge you and take you out of your comfort zone. Okay, it's a bit of a busy slide, but it's in the paper, so you can look at it more slowly. But we're trying to effect a shift from what we see in the moment in everyday social media. Okay, these are all the things that we currently see. And we're trying to effect a shift down to this side. And I won't go through all of these in detail, but you can see what I'm talking about. That not just having friends. I want friends who may actually challenge and disagree with me. I may need, I don't want to just do tweeting and rapid exchange of information. I want to have learning conversations which force me to unpack my assumptions and maybe challenge those. I want to move from just a tagged cloud to a set of meaningful connections that show that I've actually grasped the shape of this topic I'm trying to grasp. I'll talk a little bit later on about learning analytics. I want to move from recommendations about what to buy to recommendations that say things like, people who got stuck here did the following kinds of things. So the social learn platform we're building has a number of key features. The idea that you register and you create a profile which is particularly about what you want to learn about, or what you feel able and willing to teach about as well. So we're trying to blur, you know, I may be a learner on one thing and mentoring you on something else, or you may be mentoring me on something else. We're trying to create a toolkit where I can bring together tools from the cloud as well as tools that we might provide as a university and organize them into meaningful toolkits. It needs to have the look and feel of a social media platform. It needs to be open and interoperable. So here's a few screenshots. Here's my homepage, where I'm specifying the kinds of things that I'm thinking about, what I want to learn about, what I think I can help with, questions I'm asking. So things like questions and ideas and learning journeys, we'll see in a minute, these are first-class objects. This is the world of ideas. We're trying to teach people to think. These need to be first-class objects that people can link to and point to and challenge. Naturally, I have some kind of dashboard that shows me what my friends are doing, etc., what they're learning about. And so that's just the bread and butter of a social networking platform, okay? We just brought in a load of classes that support friending, messaging, following. That's just out of the box almost. But that's not really a learning environment. That's just yet another social networking platform, right? We don't get any prizes for that. The question then is how we take that bread and butter stuff, which has very low entry thresholds for use, and start adding on a layer of tools that support my inquiry and my particular passion or curiosity. And so we're using Google Gadgets, which is one form of the general concept of a widget. So we are creating gadgets in Social Learn, to for example, develop my PhD skills, or show a path. I'll show you one of those in a minute. Or a gadget that says I'm stuck, or I can do mentoring with. And of course, the whole point about using Google Gadgets is that there's a huge directory of stuff out there already. And anybody who builds an interesting system that we want to take advantage of, if we can create a gadgetized form of that, I can get that on my dashboard and access that service. And so within KMI, the Knowledge Media Institute, we have various gadgets. The OU is producing gadgets. Like the University of Catalonia have written gadgets for accessing Moodle. We would hope our developer community are doing that. E-science projects, many, many people are producing these things. It's like the App Store for your iPhone. So that's one strategy for trying to stay open to innovation. Here's my gadget container. And you can just see I've dropped in a few example gadgets there to Twitter, Facebook, BBC News. Naturally, I can drop these into iGoogle as well. They're just standard widgets I can drop into anywhere which contains these things. One of the ideas we're developing is that wherever you go on the web, you've got your learning toolkit with you. So here I am looking at the OpenEd website. Of course, OpenEd website knows nothing about Social Learn. However, you can bring up this toolbar, which is just like a bookmarklet on your toolbar, on your browser, and access your gadgets in context. So if I had an annotation gadget here, I might highlight something of interest and clip it and put it into that gadget. If we just zoom in on that, you can see the gadget has a number of aspects to it. For example, a status update, or what I'm thinking about. Or I can switch the gadget set. So we have the notion of different sets of gadgets. These are like different toolkits where you configure the tools you need for one project. It might be totally different from the tools you need on another project, right? If a site enables our gadgets, then of course they can embed them in situ, and they might show recommendations which are contextualized to the page. And assuming I'm signed into Social Learn, I might be seeing recommendations here when I'm viewing one page that somebody else sees quite different recommendations because they have a different profile. So here we are embedded in an OU website called CloudWorks, which is a learning collaboration space. And we are recommending things that I might want to look at based on not only the content of the page, but my interests too. Let's think about a more complicated sort of learning construct, which is that of a learning journey. So we've already heard about learning journeys yesterday, actually. Kaplan were talking about the idea of a portfolio where you assemble your learning, and the WYSIWYs learning trajectories was a particularly sophisticated, I thought, but correspondingly harder to use notion of a learning journey. So I think this is particularly important. There's so much stuff out there. I want people to show me ways of getting through that ocean in what they consider to be a coherent learning journey. And this ties in, if you're familiar with Urjo Engstrom's work on wildfire activities, he talks about the idea of inquiry and trails and history and landmarks and places as particularly important. And this is one instantiation of that. Okay, so I'm learning something. I've been to Wikipedia, and then I found a really interesting YouTube movie. And actually, I want to recommend that other people who want to tackle that might want to go there too. So I want to be able to just say, go here, and here's why I think you should go here. Here's my annotation. And then go here, and here's my annotation. There's a minimalist learning path, okay? And I want this to be as easy to create as possible, and I want to be able to share it as a meaningful construct in the world of learning. If I was a little bit more diligent, I might say, you might want to tackle this journey in order to answer this question. If I was a little bit more diligent, I might add an actual activity to go and do. I might say a little summary here and an activity to go and do to try and build and assess whether you actually understood what you've just been reading and watching. Or somebody else might add that in. Okay, it doesn't have to be me. This is a social, shareable, improvable artifact. And if I was even more diligent, or as an instructional designer, I might add a reflection point to actually try and consolidate what I thought you might have learned at the end of that. Naturally, there will be many of these paths, and I might actually decide that really the best way through this maze is to sort of do that and weave my own path out of that. And if we build in a web app like Cohere, which we were talking about yesterday, I could explicitly agree or disagree with people's views, and there could be semantics on these as well. So now we're building a conceptual web above the world of the OER space. Okay, this is what it looks like. How quickly could I create a path? Right, here's the path name, Resilience Thinking. This is what I was talking about yesterday. A quick one-sentence intro. If I can be bothered, I might specify, I think it'll take you 15 minutes, and then I want to add a step. Here's the next step. Go to this movie at the Stockholm Resilience Institute and watch this great introduction to Buzz Holling, father of resilience theory. Then I want you to go to the People and Place website, where they generalize resilience from ecology and talk about how you can apply that to systems in general. Go. Publish. However, if I can be a little bit more diligent, maybe I should add some keywords, or say what questions this answers, or attach a group or some events, which you can see down here, right? Why not attach a question, and that'll help other people find this path, because they're looking for a similar question. And if we look at websites like Quora, etc., they're already doing a fantastic job on a question-centric social inquiry website, and we might want to be looking at the kinds of things they've been doing too. And here I am browsing a path now. This is actually a path out of the Open University's OpenLearn. So we just suck in the XML, and now we're re-rendering it just through a different user interface. But of course, this is hooked into a whole social network of people that Social Learn doesn't know anything about right now. Okay? So it might be that Social Learn provides an environment for bringing your OERs in if you want to add a whole social interaction space around it. And you can also see there's a number of features here where I'm kind of doing a traffic light indicator of how well I'm doing. Have I got it? Am I working on it? I'm really not sure. You can see, I can tag that there. You can see there are some groups attached to this path. There are some ratings. Was the question that it claimed to address answered or not, in my view? Am I happy to assist other users? So in a social learning space for inquiry, we don't just have friends. We have people who might be teaching each other, and the platform needs to be able to understand that that's important. Okay, the final piece is around learning analytics and recommendation engines. This, for us, is a huge part of what the next generation of learning platforms will be. We're all familiar with people who bought this, also bought this, people who looked at this toaster, bought that toaster, right? Right now, we're not looking at commerce, but this is potentially a platform in which we could consider offering value-added services around content and the social network. These are becoming commodity services. People who viewed this also viewed this. You have 3 friends in common. People who rate her also rate him. Okay? It's getting a bit more interesting because we can bring in some of the R&D we're doing at the Knowledge Media Institute to do semantic and multimedia indexing of content to show you smart stuff. So if you're particularly interested in a particular painting, we can find you other images and videos where somebody talked about that painting. And we're doing linked data stuff. And then we could think of analytics and services tuned to learning in particular, where we're looking at, for example, the kinds of semantic connections we have in Cohere. This is a counterexample. This is supporting evidence. Or we're looking at learning to learn skills, so-called 21st century skills. So whatever the subject is, if I'm trying to develop my ability to work effectively with other people or ask good questions or think more creatively, those are domain-independent attributes, and we are trying to figure out, can a platform figure out whether you're actually stretching yourself on one of these dimensions? And we're working with Bristol University on one particular approach to that called learning power. Okay, so this is really where we've got to. For the next 6 months, we're exploring all of these issues. We're looking at something that really will scale, that really gets genuine, authentic user engagement, that we can evidence social learning going on. So we have a whole research team around this. We're doing different kinds of indexing, linked data, connection out to RDF spaces. There are other projects working with learning widgets, of course, and we want to just be able to bring those widgets in and add to our library of tools. That's the sort of open innovation thing. Analytics and recommendation engines, we're helping to set up that learning analytics conference that Eric mentioned. Walled gardens. Clearly, you don't necessarily want to do everything out there in public. You may want a closed space where you've just got your community, and so that kind of facility will be very important, we think, for different institutions, different subnetworks and communities of inquiry. And, of course, we're continuing to develop gadgets and web apps, particularly around learning, as opposed to just socializing. Okay, so track is on the blog, and we'll be making this available as soon as we can, but right now we're still trying to make sure we have something that we're proud of and has credibility. So thanks very much.
We have time for 1 or 2 questions.
Thank you very much. I seem to be the guilty one always asking the questions. I've got 3 comments, Simon, about these kinds of systems. Once upon a time, I was involved with the Air Force developing heads-up displays for pilots, and some of the people who were working on the stuff, they had built these wonderful interfaces where they give the pilots all kinds of information as to what they needed to fly their airplane. And the test pilots took it up, and they came back, and they said, you know what, this is really, really nice, all this stuff and all this access to information. But when I'm flying my fighter pilot and I'm in a dogfight, there's 3 things I want to know. I want to know which way is up, how much clearance have I got from the ground, and where's the enemy. And I think that when we develop these systems, we sometimes make it a bit too cluttered. And I think that striving for simplicity in the environment is something we should be looking for. So I'm not meaning this as a criticism. I'm just thinking it as a goal, that we have to keep these things simple. The second thing I thought about was I was at a conference up in Norway in January, and they were talking about how they had invested heavily in a LMS system that had a social learning side to it. And they pointed out that of the 10,000 learners, at any given time, you might find 16 online. Because although social learning was important, the social learners were using their own tools, the tools that they were using for socializing elsewhere. And so the integration with the everyday tools of Twitter and that, I think, will also be very important. Learning is an everyday thing, so I think that having a separate system sometimes for learning and expecting our learners to go off and do all their learning in Moodle or wherever else can be hazardous. The third comment is that sometimes we have an approach to learning that says the one who collects the most stuff wins, when in reality it's the one who creates the best patterns from that stuff is the one who actually develops the knowledge. And so I think that if we can build tools that push more towards metacognitive structuring, so the learners are not just collecting stuff, but they're reflecting as they go about how this fits in their schema, that would be useful. And I would suggest that there's some guys out at Simon Fraser, Nesbitt and Winnie, who've been building metacognitive tools that might be of use to this. And I think it's just a question of figuring out how to bring those principles together to keep it simple enough. Maybe you could comment on the complexity, on the growing complexity of these systems.
Okay, so you can create a dashboard which is as simple or complex as you want. Some folks want to sit down and see a dashboard which has their whole universe in it. Other people might want to just have one gadget set, which is the key stuff, and another, and then break it out into lots of smaller. So that's the whole idea of the customizable dashboard, right? You may never actually want to live in social learn. You might want to just live in Facebook. So if we write a Facebook app, it's connecting into social learn. It's leveraging the kinds of activity going on in social learn, but you may very rarely visit the site. Right? if you're building an app, so, if we go and look at, a great metacognitive reflection tool, right, we're never going to build every app you want. We're not trying to create the all singing, all dancing, we do everything. Quite the opposite. I've been trying to emphasize that. So the idea is that if somebody had an app that does something great in learning, and they want to leverage the power of a network of people committed to learning and inquiry, then they can interface their tool into social learning, either via the API or, if they have, if they actually want to exchange data, read and write data, or just by feeds, or by providing a gadget interface into their universe that I can add to my dashboard because it's an important part of my world. So I take all your points. I agree. We're trying to design an architect to allow for that kind of flexibility and variation in personal style and taste, etc. And it's a tough task, and it'll only really get tested as we roll it out and start to get other people working around it.